Hello, I'm Helen from Agrarian Games, and we posted a little question to see whether anybody online had any Ask Me Anything questions for us about working at Agrarian Games. I'm here with Jake Birkett, my husband and co-conspirator in Agrarian Games. Hello, Jake.
Hello, everybody.
So we've got a bunch of questions here that people have written in. So without further ado, I'm going to just kick off and I'll ask a question. Is that all right, Jake?
Yeah, did they send them by postcard to the PO box
Yeah,
somewhere?
they sent them on a scroll with,
Okay.
beautifully. No, they didn't. They sent them via our Patreon. So we'll give you some more details on our Patreon later. But it's a great place where if we don't answer any of your questions today, we're highly likely to have written something about whatever questions you may have. Or you can always ask us more. We're happy to answer
hmm
them. So yeah, the first question I have is from Scott Reynolds. And he says, what games made you want to make games yourself? So, what games made you want to make games, Jake? And when was that, perhaps, for a bit of context?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure any particular game actually made me want to make games in the 80s, right? Because I started to learn how to make games in the 80s. What happened was that my computer, the Spectrum 48K, came with a basic manual. And so I just learned to program from that. And naturally, I tried to make bits of games based on games I was playing at the time, but also used to be able to get books from the libraries that told you how to program certain games. So I would sort of try to make those mini role playing games or whatever. It wasn't necessarily a specific game, but there are games that have influenced me from then that I sort of come back to. Like I did make a mini platform game with a friend, and that was influenced by Ghosts and Goblins, a classic arcade game. And when I recently made my mini game on Pico 8 that's on itch.io, called Where's My Computer Gone? That the starting screen had gravestones and trees and was in a grave, so that was influenced by Ghosts and Goblins. And I've actually always wanted to make a kind of bigger, better platformer, but I know they're not necessarily viable for most indies because I'm a big fan of the Turrican series of games. I also want to make something like a Dungeon Master game if I ever had a chance, like Dungeon Master being the 1987 sort of walking into the screen, turning 90 degrees game. And, various vertical shoot 'em ups I'd like to make, and I've made sort of my own one. So I am influenced by those old games, but I'm not sure they would be necessarily commercially viable. I know this is a long answer, but it's a big question.
That's all
Uh,
right. It's an ask you anything. You can answer anything.
and then if we fast forward to 2004, I played a game called Cave Story, and a friend of mine, he said, "Hey, check out this indie game." And I played it, and I think I played Gish around the same time, and I thought, God, yeah, actually, I want to stop making business software and make games. And I was making a game part-time, and then I eventually decided to go full-time. And that part-time game was a platformer game, actually, a kung fu beat 'em up. But around the time I played Bejeweled, which is a PopCap classic game, and I decided actually I liked it and I wanted to make a Christmas themed one. So I made a game called Xmas Bonus at the time. And then I ended up making casual games for kind of 20 years, apart from a few various different things outside of that. So yeah, that's my answer. It's a long answer. How about you, Helen? What made you want to
So
make
I've got
games?
a bit of a slightly backwards answer. So I'll start off by saying which book made me want to make a game, and then explain how that goes back to an early game I did play. So when I was a teenager, I used to read a lot of my mum's kind of romantic fiction bookshelf, and it included a lot of books by. I mean, I read Jane Austen and all the typical ones you might imagine, but I also read a lot of books by Georgette Heyer. And she's an author from, I think, the 1960s and 70s, who did an awful lot of research and a lot of really historically accurate stories, even though the stories themselves were usually fairly frivolous. But they have a lot of the sort of tropes you'd expect from sort of Regency romance type novels. Anyway, I guess I was thinking about those kind of books one day when I was talking to Jake about games, and this whole idea came to me about what about a game set in the Regency period, and basically based on card games. There were a lot of card games. They were super popular at the time, and also quite big things got decided by card games. Like you could end up gambling off your daughter or your house, or losing your fortune, and all this kind of stuff. That's quite high stakes. So I thought that could be fun. Jake had already made a couple of card-based games at the time. So, there's often this trope of somebody who doesn't really know much about making games popping their head up and saying, I've got a great idea for a game, and the weary programmer nodding and smiling politely and thinking, that's not viable, or no, someone's made 20 games like that already. But actually, it turned out my idea was viable when we went off to make Regency Solitaire. So just to go back, I guess at that point, I'd always been a writer, mostly sort of journalistic type writing, less creative writing, other than just for fun. But I do remember, well, obviously, from the point of view of making Regency Solitaire, it was a lot of stuff to do with the story and the setting, and the research was what I ended up doing in terms of making the game, telling stories basically. But when I was a very young child, when we definitely didn't have computers at home, and they just used to be wheeled in, one computer per classroom in school. I do remember very vividly playing a game called Granny's Garden, and this is a very, very early game. And it featured a sort of witch character who's evil and says various things and frightens small children. And I do remember as a child hacking into that game and learning enough sort of basic code to mess around with it and changing all the words in it. But when the teachers asked what I was up to, I said, oh, it might scare the younger children. I'm just editing it. So that's kind of a little bit of a weird flash forward to the kind of work I actually have ended up doing on games years and years later. So I was obviously always interested in that side. So that's my answer.
I played Granny's Garden too, but not your version of it.
No, I can't remember what I put in my version of it. We definitely messed around, me and some friends in our class, with the text quite a lot, and we really enjoyed doing it. We messed around with the colours and various other things as well, because you could mess around with a lot of things those days in those types of games. But I definitely remember editing the text. So that's the answer to what made us want to make games. I've got a few more questions here, which we can move on to if you like. These are from Chris Boyer. I think that's how you say his name. First question, this one's definitely one for Jake. What was the trickiest and most frustrating bug you ever had to fix?
Well, I've had to work on code so many years that it's kind of hard to remember a specific version. I mean, I've definitely had bugs that have taken me so long that I've had to sort of like stop and come back to them the next day, or they've taken hours and I've needed a break and I've taken a break and walked around and solved them, the old classic thing. Basically, intermittent bugs are the hardest to fix because you can't replicate them very easily. So you need to first figure out how to replicate them, and that I've had some tricky ones like that. Or ones caused by the engine, not even your code, and I've seen bugs like that before. And then you try to figure out what have I done wrong, and eventually you realize it's not you, it's the actual engine you're using or language or something, right? One issue I had with Shadowhand was it turned out a sort of DirectX issue where it was running out of VRAM to upload all of the textures for the game to. And years later, I found out that's because it's limited to a 32-bit memory space of 2 gigabytes, actually. And what we had to do with Shadowhand was sort of then refactor the entire sort of all the graphics we were loading in and be more careful with which ones we put in the memory and unloaded them when we didn't need them, that kind of stuff. So that required a whole kind of systemic change in order to get around that. It wasn't really a bug, I guess, like a limitation, but it appeared to be like a bug at first. And another one that I've had to mitigate isn't really even a bug. It's like third-party applications interfering with the save game data for our games. So OneDrive is a classic. Like if your My Documents folder is on OneDrive and you write a file there, it temporarily locks it while it tries to upload. Then if you write to it again while it's locked, you get a crash. So my system has code now to like try several times and wait in between. Or virus killers do the same kind of thing. They might lock a file whilst they're checking it. So, a lot of the worst things I've had is actually not with my own code, it's with other things. Recently, though, I did fix a bug in my code, which was actually something I wrote 15 years ago or something, right? And it only worked in a very specific scenario for this old game, though I didn't realize it at the time, and it didn't work with my current use case. And I had to the thing is, I didn't want to just change the way that worked because it would break the old game. So I've ended up putting in a flag in my code called use bugged code. And if that's set to 1, it will use the old code. And for my modern games, I use the fixed code. So I do stuff like that sometimes. Anyway, there's an answer.
Yeah. Just to follow up for people who might not be aware, tell the people watching at home what code you do use, because many people obviously use engines like Unity and things like that. Do you want to just briefly explain what you're
Right,
using
so
to
I'm
make your...
using Blitz Max mostly. I have used Unity and I've used lots of things over the years, but Blitz Max is a language that came out in 2004, and it's a basic style language, but it's actually closer to C sharp, I guess, that sits on top of C++ libraries. So it's not really an engine like Unity, and you have to write all the code yourself, but you've got some core functionalities that help with drawing, sound, file handling and stuff like that, lower level stuff. So it's a cool thing, and I really like it. And there were originally a few bugs in the engine, which I was one of the forum members who would occasionally say, hey, I found this thing, and then the creators would go and fix it, which was very nice. And it's an engine that's adaptable. I can actually go down into the C++ beneath the main engine and modify that if I need to, which I have done as well, for a few things to do.
So it's your own game engine that you've basically created for our Gralian Games titles. It's not something with tools that are already pre-made.
No, Blitzmax is a language, to be clear, but it's not really an engine, but it's, I don't know, it's almost in between a language and an engine. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I just thought some people might want that extra detail talking about bugs. So what general lessons, this is a further question from Chris, by the way, what general lessons did you learn from your early days that have most shaped your process today? I guess this is game development primarily.
Do you want to answer that first this time, or?
Ooh, what general lessons? Yeah, I learned very early on, and it was definitely mainly Jake that taught me that making games is incredibly systemic. And as somebody coming from the whole narrative, storytelling, creative ideas side, that I can't just make up any story I want and then make a game fit to my story. That sounds maybe a little bit of a strange thing to say, but everything has to be sort of broken down into what can be used meaningfully and be fun in the game. And sometimes there's some great story ideas or great characters or interactions or things that just don't make it into the game because they wouldn't be fun for the player. And conversely, I've had to make up things or change the orders of things to not what my original story had in it, to make it work.
That's because of things like we might have an order that we want to introduce power-ups or shop items in the game that makes sense from a gameplay perspective, but the story has to fit those.
Yeah, so I guess what it's taught me, I was quite used to working with structures in the past because I did do things like journalism and press and PR, and writing press releases and things like that, which do have very strict rules and formulas, and each publication has very strict rules and formulas. So I was quite aware of that. But it's definitely quite an interesting discipline as a writer to have to be thinking of the framework and how the function of each piece of writing you write and how it will be used and seen by the player as you write it. So I think that's been something really interesting for me, and I think it's been really helpful. I think it's probably made me a better writer. It's made me and then I've gone off to work for other people's games outside of our studio as well, and that sort of idea of functionality and how things are used and understanding, I don't know, tutorial dialogues and things like that, all different sorts of pieces of writing that appear in the game for all sorts of different functions. Yeah, it's just been really interesting, and I've enjoyed learning about that. I think I'm quite good at it now, but I didn't used to be. So that's what I've learned and enjoyed.
Well, you've been working in games since 2013 now, so that's 12 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time. That's longer than some whole studios survive.
Sure.
Okay, so what did I learn? Okay, so again, it depends how early you mean, right? In terms of early days. If we go back like 40 years, then, or in the 80s or certainly the 90s, well, both of those. I learned how to write efficient code because in BASIC was so slow that you had to write efficiently. But then I moved on to assembly language. And again, you still had to write efficiently for 16-bit computers or 8-bit computers. But at least assembly language was faster than BASIC. So I've carried that sort of thinking efficiently and using tricks to make stuff happen faster over to my current code. Now, the only thing is that often that doesn't really matter as much on a modern PC, but it can still matter in certain aspects of the engine, particle systems or any kind of simulation and stuff like that. And recently, I had to optimize some code for our latest game, Forbidden Solitaire, which is like a 90s horror game. It's supposed to be like a 1995 DOS-based CD-ROM game, and it has FMV, full motion video sequences that look like they're read in from a CD-ROM and streamed to the screen. And I actually did that by using a kind of GIF player that somebody else had come up with in Blitzmax, but it was too slow for our purposes, for full screen GIFs. And I optimized it to make it 3 times faster using some very old school techniques. But those seem to work quite well. And, so that old school knowledge came back. I'm getting a lot of sun in on my screen. Maybe it's okay.
It's okay, yeah. You just look like you've got a special effect happening.
Ta-da! It's just suddenly got very sunny. Okay,
so that's been quite interesting then, in terms of you being someone who did actually code in 1995, and then us now having to make a retro kind of game where you've got to pretend it's a game from 1995. It's sort of quite an interesting, I don't know, trip down memory lane or thing about remembering what sort of things you were doing or what was available at that time.
Just, knowing how to optimize it. Well, it kind of stuck with me. I just sort of knew. Also, the Blitzmax language we're using is from 2004, so it's closer to 1995 than now, which is kind of interesting. Also, what other lessons did I learn? Well, for my indie career, sort of since 2005, I was very early on inspired by casual games. So casual games at the time were the only kind of indie games that were selling in decent numbers. So that was things like Bejeweled, card games, hidden object games, and so on. And a lot of them were very polished and had really good polish, which I love putting in our games. And one of the influential games at the time was Peggle, which, a lot of you have heard of. And that had incredible polish, and we definitely tried to emulate that in a game I made called Unwell Mel, which came out similar time, I think. I was quite pleased that when we made Fairway Solitaire, actually, that one of the creators of Bejeweled got back to us and said that was a really good game. We like it. I was like, yay. So these early casual games.
Did you mean Fairway Solitaire? Sorry.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Fairway Solitaire?
Yeah.
Oh, the Bejeweled person, was it?
Yeah. I made
okay,
Fairway
not
Solitaire.
One of the match threes.
No. Yeah, it was Fairway Solitaire. PopCat got back to us and said that was a really good game.
Okay.
Yeah, so because I don't think I made great match threes until after that, to be honest. Like Unwell Mel was good, and then Spooky Bonus later on. That sort of thing where you need to give the player good visual and auditory feedback, and so that you make the game feel fun in the minute-to-minute gameplay. That's really something I've always worked on, like the clicking of cards in our game or the sliding of things in match threes. Even in T-30, this sort of game made in Unity, it's like a city builder where you have to build a city and make loads of rockets before the planet blows up. Even the feel of placing the buildings there, and the menu I tried to make feel really nice. So that's something I learned. And actually my games also follow the casual game typical structure of having levels, and then with a story, since I've been working with Helen, and then some kind of shop with power-ups. So you level up, you read the story, you play the levels, and then the game ends. So that's the kind of structure my games follow, and Forbidden Solitaire is really no different in that sense as well. Okay, that's that. Maybe we've got time for one more question.
Yeah, we've got one more question, also from Chris. Thank you, Chris, for sending so many good questions.
These are good ones.
Yeah, these are good ones. Okay, let's finish up with what recent game most inspired that famous "I wish I'd made this" kind of admiration?
Okay.
So what game recency? The recency is going to be a bit difficult maybe for me, but
I can definitely answer that, because I stayed up too late last night playing Ball X Pit, which is an indie game that's came out recently, which is a Vampire Survivors like, with a sort of theme of Breakout or Arkanoid or whatever of those terms makes sense to you, in that your character, you wander around and it fires balls up the screen that bounce off the sides and off blocks which are enemies, and you get to level up over time like any Vampire Survivors. And there's a meta game for unlocking slight improvements each run, and there's a host of different characters and different levels. It's super addictive, really well made, total dopamine type game, very polished, clever design ideas. It's more than just what it looks like. Like all the characters are pretty clever, the way they vary and stuff. They've really data mined the design space, so it's a great game. So that's one. Balatro, do I wish I'd made that? Here's the thing. I do, in a sense that, like, it's a card game and we've been making card games for years and we never made that. I also knew that poker was more popular on Steam and with mainstream audiences than solitaire. I've known that for a long time. Well, mainstream gamer audiences. Like, of course, solitaire was always popular with casual gamers, but they moved to mobile and it's super popular there. But on Steam and PC, you know, poker is hot. And I know Balatro did well on mobile as well. So we never made a poker game. Maybe we could have. And then there's things like Clover Pit came out recently, and that's a gambling machine. Now, I don't exactly wish I'd made that, but it's funny because in the 80s I made a fruit machine simulator. I even made a horse racing game, which you bet on horses after winning £10 on the Grand National. So I did stuff like that. There's things also like Loop Hero, which I really enjoyed, which is fairly recent, which I don't think I would have made because I wouldn't have thought up that mechanic. So that's just an opposite type of thing. And I'm sure I've missed out many, and I'm talking about indie games, not AAA, but that's my list. What about you, Helen? Any recent games
Well,
that
it's
you
the
wish
recent thing.
that
So
you,
the
well,
most,
maybe go back 5, 10 years
yeah,
then.
well, the most recent one that I'm thinking of that I really enjoyed playing, which I thought was clever, was Strange Horticulture. Now I know that the makers of that game have come up with a new game called Strange Antiquities, but I cannot honestly say I've played it yet. I haven't had time to try it yet, but I'm sure it's brilliant in similar ways. So yes, I thought that was really nice. I have played some other games before that have involved, like Potion Simulator, that have involved trying to mix together various plants and search for them. But I found the mechanics in that one a little bit less rewarding, whereas I thought the little game loop in Strange Horticulture was really clever. There was a lot of atmosphere with storytelling cleverly done, but like very briefly. So you didn't have to read tons and tons of text to still get the fun vibe of this strange little village you found yourself in. It had some sort of north of England references to kind of real places, which I thought was really, really nice as well. And I like the art style. So I thought that was a lovely game. And I'm a big fan of sort of gardening and herbalism, and I did study chemistry once. So all that stuff to do with brewing up potions and witchy growing things and looking for strange plants in the woods is right up my alley. So I think that's a really nice game, and I'm really looking forward to playing the newest one, which I know, Strange Antiquities, which is out now. But just to mention a couple of other games, I think just narrative games goes back a long way, and that's the 80 Days by Inkle Studios. That really did inspire me to do with how people can tell stories and choice-based stories. But again, very simply with very beautiful, simple, clean sort of visuals. And I think everything that Inkle makes is brilliant. Another one that I played a lot and really, really enjoyed was Overboard. And I know there's a sequel to that one that I'm looking forward to playing as well. I've downloaded it, but I haven't given it a try. So yeah, anything to do, any of those have been really inspiring to me in terms of games with a fairly simple game loop and not walls and walls of text, but they're still storytelling games and reading games, really beautifully done. So yeah, those are some examples that I've enjoyed.
Okay, good.
And I
So
think that's it for today's Ask Me Anything.
yeah, so let's
But
try and do this again soonish.
yes, we will do it again soon. If you can find lots, as I said before, lots of other stuff from us on our Patreon. So if you just search Grey Alien Games on Patreon, you will find us. Um, there are various membership options, but you can also see an awful lot of stuff for free because
Yeah.
we do put a lot of free information, sharing stuff from other developers. Yeah, there's loads of information on there about game development and adjacent things that you might
Any
find of
kind of
interest. So do check it
musings,
out.
yeah, general musings about the
Thoughts about the
industry.
industry, data,
They're,
how things. Yeah,
well, I was
all
going to say
sorts.
the musings are kind of free. Any data we share about our own games tend to be paid for because we're sort of sharing that sort of private data. But yeah, there's
Sure, but
loads of stuff on
there's a
there.
lot on there.
Take
There's
a
a lot on
look.
there, so check it out.
All right,
All right,
thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for asking, and see you around. Bye.